The delivery driver called me while I could still see him standing on my front porch. He wasn't asking me to come outside. He was telling me not to. This happened in Bloomington, Indiana, when I was 27. I was renting the lower half of a small house near the south side of town. It wasn't isolated exactly. There were houses on both sides and another row behind the alley, but most of the nearby rentals emptied out during university breaks. That week in January, the block was quieter than usual. My name is Lauren. At the time, I worked remotely for a medical billing company. My boyfriend, Eric, was in Indianapolis for 3 days of training, so I had the place to myself. The house had a front door facing the street and a back door off the kitchen. The back door opened onto a narrow wooden landing with 3 steps down to the yard. Beyond that was a detached garage and an alley. There was also a window over the kitchen sink. It was too high to reach easily from outside, but the lock was old and sometimes didn't catch unless you pushed the frame down hard. I mentioned that because Eric was always checking it. I thought he was being obsessive. Around 9 that night, I was answering emails at the kitchen table when someone knocked. Not a quick tap. 3 slow, heavy knocks. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I stayed where I was. A few seconds later, my phone lit up with a delivery notification from an app I used maybe twice a month. Your order has arrived. The name on the order was mine. The address was mine. It showed a paid order from a burger place across town, 1 combo, 1 shake, and a side of fries. I hadn't ordered it. My first thought was that Eric had sent me food. He did things like that sometimes, and I had complained earlier that I hadn't eaten dinner. I texted him, but he didn't answer. The driver knocked again, then he called through the door. "Lauren, delivery." There was nothing threatening in his voice. He sounded cold and impatient. I walked into the front room and checked through the blinds. He was a young guy in a dark jacket, holding a paper bag and a drink carrier. His car was idling at the curb with the hazard lights on. I opened the door with the chain still hooked. "I didn't order anything," I said. He checked his phone. "It's paid for. This is the address." I asked if there was a note. He looked down, scrolled, and said, "It just says hand it directly to customer." That bothered me, but not enough yet. I told him he could leave it on the porch. He didn't move. He looked past me into the house, then over my shoulder toward the side yard. His expression changed. It wasn't dramatic. He just stopped looking annoyed. "Do you know somebody in a gray coat?" he asked. I said no. He lowered his voice. "There's a guy by your garage." I started to turn toward the kitchen. The driver immediately said, "Don't go back there." Then my phone rang. It was him, the driver, even though he was standing less than 6 feet away. He had called through the app so we wouldn't have to keep talking loudly through the gap in the door. I answered. He kept his face angled toward his phone and said quietly, "That man came up to my car when I parked. He said he was your brother. He told me you have trouble hearing the doorbell and asked me to keep knocking until you came outside." For a second, I didn't understand what that meant. I was still looking at the food bag. Then he added, "He specifically said to keep you at the front door." The kitchen was directly behind me, at the back of the house. I shut the front door and locked the deadbolt. The driver stepped off the porch but didn't leave. Through the blinds, I saw him walk backward toward his car, watching the space between my house and the garage. I called 911. The dispatcher told me to move to an interior room if I had one. I didn't. The bathroom had no outside window, but getting there meant crossing the kitchen entrance. I stayed in the front room with the lights off and picked up the heavy brass candle holder from the mantel because it was the closest solid thing I could find. The driver was still on the line through the delivery app. His name was Marcus. He told me the man had disappeared behind the garage. Then Marcus said, "He's at the back steps." I heard the kitchen screen door open. That sound was normal. The spring had weakened, and the screen door always dragged across the bottom step before opening. I had heard it hundreds of times. What came next wasn't normal. Someone tried the back doorknob once, gently, then again, harder. I told the dispatcher he was testing the door. She told me officers were close and asked whether I could leave through the front. I looked through the blinds. Marcus had moved his car directly in front of the walkway with his headlights aimed at the house. His driver's door was open. He was standing behind it, still holding his phone. I almost ran to him. Then the man behind the house knocked on the kitchen window. 3 slow knocks, the same rhythm as the front door. He said my name, not loudly. He said it like someone trying not to wake another person in the house. Lauren. The kitchen window frame scraped upward about an inch. Eric had checked it before he left. I remembered watching him push down on the sash and turn the latch. Either it hadn't caught or someone had already done something to it. I ran. I unhooked the chain, opened the front door, and sprinted toward Marcus's car. He shouted for me to get in. I barely had the passenger door closed when a figure came around the side of the house. I saw a gray coat, jeans, and something dark covering the lower half of his face. He stopped when he saw the car moving. Marcus didn't wait. He pulled away so fast that the drink tray slid off the roof and burst in the street. We met the first patrol car 2 blocks away. The officers searched the yard, garage, alley, and neighboring lots. They didn't find the man. The kitchen window was open about 4 inches. There were fresh pry marks near the latch and a muddy shoe print on the lower siding where someone had braced himself. The back doorknob had also been wiped. The officer said the surface looked cleaner than the rest of the door. The food order had been placed through a new account using my name and address. The payment came from a prepaid card. Whoever created it had also entered my phone number, which explained why I received the notification. What the police couldn't explain was how the man knew I would be alone. Eric hadn't posted about Indianapolis. I hadn't told anyone except 2 coworkers, and neither knew my exact address. We later learned that the little camera over the alley entrance at the end of the block had been turned toward the ground. It wasn't broken. Someone had loosened the mount by hand. I moved out before the end of that month. Marcus and I stayed in contact for a while. He told me he had almost followed the man's instructions because the story sounded believable. The guy was calm, friendly, and even complained that I always made deliveries difficult. The part that stays with me isn't the gray coat or the window opening. It's that the plan depended on a stranger treating me like a problem instead of a person. If Marcus had been slightly more impatient, he might have kept knocking. I might have stepped onto the porch to argue with him, and the man behind my house would have had exactly what he paid for. The first recording I saved was 11 seconds long. You could hear my bedroom door open, then 3 footsteps on the wood floor. After that, a man's voice said, "He's not all the way asleep yet." I lived alone. My name is Daniel, and this happened when I was 32 in St. Paul, Minnesota. I rented the upper floor of an old duplex in the Midway area. The owner lived in Arizona most of the year, and the lower unit had been empty for about 6 weeks while it was being renovated. The house was narrow and old enough that nothing was level. My bedroom door swung open if I didn't pull it until the latch clicked. The radiators knocked at night. The floorboards reacted to temperature changes. It was the kind of place that produced enough sounds to make almost anything seem explainable. I started using the sleep app because I kept waking up with headaches. My dentist thought I might be grinding my teeth. The app was supposed to record snoring, talking, and movement. I set my phone on the dresser and let it run overnight. For the first few nights, it captured exactly what you'd expect. Blankets moving, traffic from University Avenue, and me coughing around 4 in the morning. On the 5th night, I got a recording tagged as speech at 2:41 a.m. I played it while making coffee. At first, there was just the sound of my box fan. Then the bedroom door made its little dragging noise against the floor. There were 3 steps. A man spoke close enough to the phone that his voice was clear. He's not all the way asleep yet. Another voice, farther away, answered something I couldn't make out. Then the door closed. I listened to it at least 10 times. The second voice might have been a radiator or a car radio outside. The first one wasn't either of those things. I checked the apartment. The front door was locked. The deadbolt required a key from outside. The windows were shut, and snow on the small back roof beneath the kitchen window looked undisturbed. Nothing was missing. I sent the clip to my friend Aaron, who worked with audio equipment at a church. He asked whether I had a television on. I didn't own one. Then he asked whether the app could pull audio from advertisements or other users. I looked it up and found people complaining about mislabeled audio, but nothing that explained a voice recorded in the room. Aaron told me to leave another recorder running in a different location. That night, I put an old digital recorder on the bookshelf and wedged a folded receipt into the top of the bedroom door. If the door opened, the receipt would fall. I slept badly. Every time the radiator knocked, I opened my eyes. In the morning, the receipt was still there. Neither device captured speech. That should have helped. Instead, I started wondering whether someone had seen me set the recorder. The lower unit was under renovation, and 2 contractors had been coming and going during the week. They had access to the building's shared front entry, but not, as far as I knew, to my apartment. I called the property manager, Denise, and asked whether anyone had a master key. She said she had one, the owner had one, and a lockbox key for my unit was kept at their office for emergencies. The contractors only had the lower unit key. I didn't mention the voice. I said I thought someone had entered because my bedroom door was open. Denise came that afternoon. She checked the lock and strike plate. Nothing looked forced. She offered to have the cylinder changed, but she couldn't get a locksmith there until Monday. It was Friday. I could have stayed with Aaron. I didn't because I had my dog Milo, and Aaron's lease didn't allow animals. More than that, I still felt ridiculous. I had one strange clip and no missing property. Leaving my apartment for an entire weekend felt like admitting that 11 seconds of audio had control over me. So I bought 2 cheap motion cameras. I put one in the living room aimed at the apartment door and one in the hall aimed toward my bedroom. They uploaded motion clips to my account. I tested both, checked the timestamps, and went to bed. At 3:18 a.m., Milo woke me by pressing against the side of the mattress. He wasn't barking. His body was low and he was staring at the bedroom door. I could see that it was open about 6 inches. The receipt I'd wedged into the frame was on the floor. I reached for my phone. Before I could unlock it, the door moved inward another inch. I said, "Who's there?" The door stopped. For maybe 5 seconds, I heard nothing. Then a floorboard creaked in the hall, followed by a soft click from the kitchen. I grabbed Milo's collar, locked the bedroom door, and called 911. While I was speaking to the dispatcher, I opened the camera app. The living room camera was offline. The hall camera showed a clip from 3:16. In it, the bedroom door opened by itself, or that's how it looked because the person opening it stayed behind the wall. A narrow beam of light crossed the floor. Then a gloved hand reached around the frame and lowered something toward the carpet. The clip ended before I could see what it was. I told the dispatcher someone was inside. Milo suddenly pulled away from me and started barking at the closet. My closet was shallow. Coats on one side, plastic storage bins on the other. There was nowhere for a person to stand, but behind the coats was a small rectangular panel I had always assumed covered plumbing access. It was open. Cold air was coming through it. I pushed the dresser in front of the bedroom door. Then I sat on the floor between the bed and the wall, holding Milo by the harness while the dispatcher kept talking to me. Something moved inside the opening behind the coats. It wasn't trying to come into the room, it was moving away. The police arrived within minutes. Officers cleared my apartment, then the lower unit. They found nobody. What they did find was a vertical service space running beside the old chimney. The access panel in my closet opened into it. The opening was narrow, but once inside, the space widened enough for a person to climb down using cross braces between the studs. At the bottom, it connected to a utility area behind the lower unit's kitchen wall. The renovation crew had opened that wall 3 weeks earlier. On the floor of my closet, just below the panel, police found a small plastic dropper bottle. The liquid inside was later identified to me only as a prescription sedative dissolved in water. I was told not to speculate beyond that, but the position of the bottle matched what the camera had shown. A gloved hand lowering something toward the floor near Milo's water bowl. The veterinarian couldn't determine whether Milo had already been exposed. Too much time had passed and he wasn't showing symptoms by then. The police took the bottle, the recordings, and the cameras. They questioned the contractors and a former maintenance worker. Nobody was charged. The living room camera hadn't failed on its own. Its power cable had been unplugged. The apartment door was still locked when police arrived, which meant whoever had been inside probably never used it. Denise moved me into a hotel that morning. Milo and I never slept in that apartment again. The police eventually returned a copy of the audio from my phone. Aaron cleaned it up as much as he could. The second voice became clearer, but only for 2 words. The first man says, "He's not all the way asleep yet." The other voice answers, "The dog." I had adopted Milo 9 days before that recording, so whoever was using the space inside my walls hadn't just entered once. He had been paying attention long enough to notice what had changed. The voice never said anything except my name. It didn't call from the apartment next door. It came from the wall behind my bed, close enough that I could hear the speaker wet his lips before he whispered, "Maya." I moved to Milwaukee in the fall of 2023 for a job with a nonprofit. I was 29 and had never lived completely alone before. The apartment was in a 4-story brick building on the west side that had been a small hotel decades earlier. It had been converted into studios and 1-bedroom units, but some parts still looked like a hotel. Long hallways, narrow fire stairs, and doors in odd places that the landlord had painted shut. My unit was on the 3rd floor. The bedroom shared one wall with apartment 3C, where an older man named Mr. Alvarez lived. He was quiet, polite, and usually asleep early. The wall behind my bed seemed to face his kitchen. The first time I heard someone say my name, it was around 1 in the morning. I was reading with the lamp on. The whisper came from behind my headboard, "Maya." I sat up and listened. A few seconds later, I heard a cabinet close next door. I assumed Mr. Alvarez had a television on or was talking on the phone. The building had terrible sound insulation. I could hear his microwave beep and sometimes smell his coffee through the vent. The next morning, I saw him collecting his mail and asked whether he'd called for me during the night. He looked confused. Then he smiled and said, "No, I don't think I know your name." That was true. We had only exchanged greetings. I decided he must have heard someone say it in the hallway. My last name was printed on a label inside my mailbox, and packages were left in the lobby all the time. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time I was almost asleep. The voice came from lower on the wall, near the outlet. "Maya." I turned on the light and knocked hard with my palm. The whisper stopped. A moment later, something brushed across the other side of the drywall. Not a pipe noise. It traveled from the outlet toward the corner, like a sleeve dragging over a rough surface. I called Mr. Alvarez. He answered, sounding half asleep. When I asked if anyone was in his apartment, he said no and offered to let me look. His kitchen was empty. More importantly, the wall layout didn't match what I had assumed. There was a gap of almost 3 feet between his kitchen cabinets and the line of my bedroom wall. From his side, that section was covered by a built-in pantry that looked original to the building. Mr. Alvarez tapped the back of it and said there was probably an old pipe chase between us. The next day I emailed the property manager, Carol. She said old buildings made sounds and suggested I check for mice. I replied that mice didn't know my name. That got her attention. She came up with the maintenance supervisor, Rick. He removed the cover from the outlet behind my bed and used a small inspection camera. He said there was open space behind the wall, but the camera couldn't turn far enough to show how deep it was. According to an old floor plan on his tablet, the original hotel had a service corridor between some rooms. During renovation, most of it had supposedly been sealed. Supposedly, I asked. Rick said old plans were unreliable. Then he screwed the outlet cover back on and told me there was no way anyone could enter the space from my apartment. That answer addressed the wrong problem. I already knew nobody could enter from my apartment. I wanted to know where they entered from. Carol promised to check the basement access doors. That evening, she emailed that everything was locked. For almost a week, I heard nothing. I pushed the bed away from the wall anyway. I also put strips of blue painter's tape across the outlet cover and along a hairline crack near the baseboard. It wasn't a security system. I just wanted to know whether anything moved. The following Monday, I came home late after dinner with coworkers. The tape over the outlet was intact, but the strip along the baseboard had peeled loose at one end. There was gray dust on the floor. I took pictures and called Rick. He said vibration could loosen the tape. When I asked about the dust, he said old plaster fell all the time. That night, I slept on the couch. At 2:07 a.m., I woke to the sound of my bedroom closet door sliding. I stayed still and listened. The closet door moved another few inches. Then I heard the same whisper, "Maya." It came from inside the bedroom. I got up, took my keys, and left without turning on the bedroom light. I spent the night at my coworker Tasha's apartment. The next morning, Tasha came back with me. The front door was locked. Nothing valuable was missing. The closet stood open about a foot. Inside, behind a row of hanging clothes, one section of the back wall had shifted forward. It wasn't drywall. It was a thin painted panel fitted into a frame. The edge had been hidden behind the closet rail and layers of old paint. We pulled the clothes out and found a small metal finger latch near the floor. Tasha told me not to touch it. I called the police. 2 officers arrived, then Carol and Rick. Rick kept saying he had never seen the panel before. One officer opened it. Behind my closet was a passage about 30 inches wide. It ran the length of the building with pipes along one wall and old hotel room numbers painted on the other. There was dust on most of the floor except for a narrow path where it had been compressed by repeated movement. The passage connected to access panels behind several third-floor units. Some were screwed shut. Others were only latched. My panel opened silently because someone had wrapped cloth around the places where the wood touched the frame. The officers found a folding stool, 2 empty water bottles, and a phone charger plugged into an old service outlet. Near the section behind my headboard, there were shallow marks in the plaster where someone had scraped away material until only a thin layer remained. That's how the voice had sounded so close. The entrance to the passage was in a locked storage room in the basement. The storage room lock showed no damage. Carol, Rick, the building owner, and a cleaning company had keys. Police interviewed everyone with access. They also reviewed the lobby cameras, but the camera system only kept 10 days of footage. It showed nothing useful during that period. Carol offered to move me to another unit. I refused. I packed my things while Tasha and her brother stayed with me, and I was gone by the end of the week. Mr. Alvarez moved out 2 months later. Before he left, he called me because he thought I should know what maintenance had found while replacing the pantry in his kitchen. On the wooden back panel facing into the hidden corridor, someone had written unit numbers in black marker. Beside some of them were short notes. 3A, works nights. 3C, TV loud. 3D, my apartment, had my first name and 2 times written beneath it. 11:40, 1:15. Those were roughly the times I usually turned off the bedroom light on weeknights and weekends. Mr. Alvarez sent me a photo before the panel was removed. Under the times, in smaller handwriting, was one more note. Answers when called. I had only answered once, the night I knocked on the wall. Until I saw that sentence, I thought the whispering had been meant to scare me. Now I think it was a test, just a quiet way to find out whether I was awake before the panel opened. The phone inside the locked room had been ringing for almost a minute when I received the text. It came from a number I didn't recognize. Don't open that door. My name is Emily. In 2022, I was a graduate student at West Virginia University in Morgantown. I rented a small 2-bedroom house south of downtown because it was cheaper than the newer apartments and close enough to campus for the bus. The owner, a man named Howard Price, handled the rental himself. He seemed careful but not strange. He checked my references, gave me receipts, and responded quickly when the water heater failed during my first week. There was one unusual condition in the lease walkthrough. The basement had a laundry area, a furnace, and a separate room under the front half of the house. That room had a solid door with a keyed deadbolt. Howard said it contained old electrical equipment and some personal storage. He told me not to enter it and kept the only key. That didn't concern me. Landlords keep storage spaces in rentals all the time. The room wasn't included in the square footage, and I had no reason to use it. For the first 2 months, nothing happened. Then I began noticing that the basement light was on when I hadn't left it on. The switch was at the top of the stairs. I could see the glow around the basement door from the kitchen. At first, I blamed myself. I was working late, sleeping badly, and constantly moving laundry between classes, so I started making a point of turning it off. One Tuesday morning, I found it on again. When I went downstairs, the locked room door was closed, but a flattened strip of dust ran from underneath it toward the laundry sink. It looked like something with a cord had been dragged across the floor. I texted Howard and asked whether he'd entered the basement. He replied almost immediately, "No, why?" I sent him a picture. He said the furnace technician might have moved something during the repair weeks earlier. That didn't explain the light, but I let it go. A few nights later, I heard a phone vibrating beneath the floor. My bedroom was above the locked room. The vibration came in short bursts, stopped, then started again. I went down and stood outside the door. I could hear it clearly on the other side. Howard had said the room contained storage, so an old phone wasn't impossible. I texted him again. "Is there a phone in your basement room?" He didn't respond until morning. His answer was, "There shouldn't be." He said he'd come by that weekend to check. Saturday passed. On Sunday, he told me he was out of town and would handle it the following week. The phone didn't vibrate again, and I had exams coming up. I stopped thinking about it. The following Thursday, freezing rain started around dusk. Campus closed early, and by 9 the street was quiet. My roommate Kayla had gone to visit her parents in Ohio, so I was alone. Around 11, the power blinked off and came back. The furnace didn't restart. I checked the thermostat, then went to the basement to look at the breaker panel. The main electrical panel was beside the locked door, so I had to stand close to it. That's when the phone inside began to ring. It wasn't vibrating this time. It had an old digital ringtone, loud and repetitive. I knocked on the door and called out, even though I knew how stupid that was. The ringing continued. I called Howard. It went to voicemail. Then the text arrived. "Don't open that door." I replied, "Who is this?" The answer came within seconds. "He'll know you were down there." I backed away from the door. The basement suddenly felt much smaller than it had before. The laundry machines were behind me, the stairs to my right, and the only window was a narrow pane near the ceiling that had been painted shut. I asked who he was. The phone inside stopped ringing. My screen lit again. "Go upstairs. Turn off the kitchen light. Don't call him again." I didn't follow those instructions. I ran upstairs, locked the basement door from the kitchen side, grabbed my coat, and called 911. The dispatcher asked whether I had heard a person inside the room. I said no. I explained the phone, the messages, and the fact that the room was supposed to be locked. She told me to leave the house if I could do so safely. My car was parked in the driveway. I moved toward the front door, then heard a hard metallic sound below me. The locked basement room door had opened. I knew because its hinges made a long squeal I had never heard before. A second later, the basement stairs creaked. The kitchen door handle moved. I was already at the front entrance. I opened it and ran across the icy yard to my neighbor's porch. Mrs. Hanley, who lived there with her adult son, let me in. Her son stood by the window while we waited for police. He saw someone leave through the side door of my house. The person wore dark clothing and carried a small bag. He crossed behind my garage and disappeared between the neighboring properties before officers arrived. Police searched the house and basement. The locked room door was open. There was no person inside. It wasn't an electrical storage room. There was a narrow cot, bottled water, packaged food, and a folding table with 2 old computer monitors. A cable ran through the ceiling into the wall cavity above. The monitors displayed feeds from 4 small cameras: the kitchen, the living room, the upstairs hallway, and my bedroom. The bedroom camera was hidden in a smoke detector that Howard had replaced during my first week. On the table were folders containing printed copies of rental applications, including mine and Kayla's. There were also photographs of previous tenants, spare keys labeled with dates, and several prepaid phones. One phone was still connected to a charger. It was the phone that had been ringing. The police asked for Howard's full name and contact information. When they called him, he said he was in Pittsburgh and agreed to meet them the next morning. He never did. His vehicle was found 2 days later at a motel outside Wheeling. Howard was located and questioned after that, but I wasn't given every detail of what happened. I do know he was charged in connection with the cameras and unlawful entry. I also know investigators believed someone had been inside the room that night, but they couldn't initially prove it was him. The messages came from another prepaid number registered to nobody they could identify. At first, I assumed the person texting me had been inside the room and was trying to get me away from the door. But that didn't fit what happened. If he wanted to stay hidden, making the phone ring made no sense. Warning me not to call Howard made even less sense. Then police recovered deleted messages from the phone inside the room. I wasn't shown all of them, but an investigator explained enough for me to understand. Someone else had discovered the room before I did. The messages went back months, possibly to a former tenant. That person had been contacting Howard, demanding money and threatening to expose the cameras. The ringing phone had been part of their arrangement. A missed call meant the house was empty. A completed call meant it wasn't safe to enter. Investigators also believed the other person had retained remote access to Howard's camera system. That night, the caller kept the phone ringing because they could see me standing outside the room while someone was inside it. The text telling me not to open the door wasn't meant as a threat. It was a warning from someone who knew Howard was using the room. Kayla and I never returned alone. Police allowed us to collect our things with an officer present. The house stayed empty after that, and the city eventually posted a notice on the front door. Months later, I received one final update. Investigators had examined the cot and the items in the room. Some of them had been there long before I signed the lease. Others were recent. Among the recent items was a printed copy of my class schedule with several evening seminars highlighted. Every highlighted night was a night when I would normally come home after dark. One date had been circled. It was the Thursday of the freezing rain. The night Kayla was away, campus closed early, and I came home nearly 4 hours before my schedule said I would. I used to think the power blink and the failed furnace were what started everything. They weren't. The only reason I found the room occupied was that I arrived before the person waiting inside expected me.